So I had this thought the other day about putting your mask on first, right? When you fly, they talk about in the case of an emergency, you need to put your mask on first. You need to take care of yourself in order to be able to take care of others, right? And it made me think about my marriage, and it made me think about the things that my wife needed me to work on, right? So I felt that I would have been in a better place if I'd worked on more of those things before we got married. And I just wanted to have a conversation with you about that today because I know you could help me in that area. And us having this conversation could definitely help our listeners. So I guess I'll just lead out by saying, what are your thoughts about putting your mask on first in marriage, emotionally, uh, and I guess mentally, kind of all wraps that together.
Yeah. Thinking about that analogy, we're talking about a flight attendant. So they are giving direction, right? They are the expert in the room on if something indeed happens while we're, thousands of miles in the air. You need to do this so you can help everyone else. You can be the best version of yourself in this crisis, per se. Not that we're taking it to crisis management first, but that, and thinking about the flight attendant makes me think of who do we give that space to be the quote unquote expert, who has had either experience or training of some sort, or just knowledge of marriage, or what resources are we using that can allow us to be more self-aware. That's kind of my first thought. And if no one told you that and there was an emergency, how, you're just going in there blind, right? Like you're like blindly just, okay, I need to help all these people that I'm with, but I can't breathe either. But like
Right.
when someone says that, and no matter how many times you fly, that is said. So it's like, a constant reminder of, okay, if this happens, the flight will probably be fine, but in the event, do this first so that you can help everyone else. So I think where do we, as being husbands or being in a serious committed relationship, where are we finding resources that point us and allow us to be more self-aware and see what we need to work on? And that can be our wife. In my mind, I'm just thinking that can be our wife. That can be friends that understand relationships. Sometimes, probably preferably people that have been married, but not necessarily. I know that's kind of a touchy subject, but people can give good advice if they know you and they know you're wilding. Like you don't have to, like my friends that know me don't have to be married to know that I'm being outside of myself or what I'm doing is not affecting my marriage positively, right? But you just have to be in a place where they can give that to you and you can receive it.
Right.
And then whether it's, if you're intentionally focused on your marriage, it can be books or a podcast or videos, something of that nature. But you have to be in a space where, okay, I'm not perfect. I don't have everything, buttoned up. Where can I go to continue to be better? And I think that's what first jumped out at me with that analogy.
Yeah. And then thinking about that analogy as well, which is a little bit more relatable to my situation, is let's imagine you're on that flight and you're, looking at a video or listening to music, not paying attention to the flight attendant, and something does happen. And now you don't know what to do. and you don't know how to help other people, so you just freeze,
Hmm.
right? So having those resources to know what to do in case of an emergency is, as Paul would say, paramount, right? And so that's why this topic was so important to me, is because in some of the scenarios in my marriage, I didn't know how to go about fixing the things I needed to fix. So I would freeze, especially in difficult conversations with my wife, which I've gotten a lot better about now. But back then, man, it was tough. Like I thought I was doing the right thing by walking away from a situation, when it was, in hindsight, a lot easier just to start talking about it. Right. And it was more or less because I didn't know how to manage how I was feeling about a situation. If I was feeling angry, I didn't know how to let that anger out without hurting my wife. Right.
Hmm.
Uh, these are all things that we are, relating to this topic of put your mask on first.
Yeah, I think, man, you bring up a good point. Most of the time, I would say, husbands or fiancés, serious boyfriends, like you have to figure out the best way to communicate with your wife in general, and then the best way to communicate with her in crisis slash uncomfortable spaces. Um, and now how you come about that is talking to her in a situation where it's not uncomfortable, like talking about how what words. I mean, Crystal and I had a conversation early on about words that we would say, and she was, I'm blessed to say, she was quick to point out words that triggered her. We didn't have that language as far as triggers and stuff when we first started dating, but things that she didn't like to hear because those phrases were associated with something else. Sometimes we don't even think about that until we hear it. So hearing it in a regular situation might give you a cringe, but give you in an emotionally heightened state where you can't even figure out which emotions you're trying to process, can just send you over the edge. So
Yeah.
figuring out how to communicate is definitely something that you need to do. And that starts with talking to your wife, but you can also dig and talk to other people, listen to experts on communication, read a book, watch a video, something of that nature to figure out how to communicate, how to, there's a lot of entrepreneurship, leadership books that talk about how to communicate things that may not be favorable for the other person that's hearing them. And they walk you through like how to kind of soften, give a compliment, type of those type of things if you're walking through that. But that's not the episode, but there are ways that you can try. And I think always starting with, hi, wife, I am going to try to be a better communicator. Is there anything that would help me be a better communicator with you? And then see what she says and really take it. And then try to put those steps, at least one of those steps that she says in that initial conversation, take 7 days to try to implement that in your communication with her. And I think that would be helpful. And I'll let you talk. I have more points, but I feel like I talked a lot. So
No, it's all good. I think I was starting to go towards mental health as well, right? Because that was a little bit of a problem for me as well. I suffered from depression for a little while, and I didn't necessarily understand it in the moment what was happening to me, right? So I am hesitant to say, you know, there are really things that you can do in order to like just instantly know, oh, I'm depressed. Right? This is what's happening, right? Because when you're in it, there's so many other things that are surrounding you, so many other happenings. And when you're married and you have children, so many other responsibilities you have. Typically as a father, you're not putting yourself first, right? Which again goes to the episode. Put your mask on first. You can't readily take care of your children if you're not well. Think about having the flu, right?
Right.
All you do is be laid up, and more than likely, you don't necessarily have that option. So you get out of bed, you know, go on autopilot, and you go through your day. But what do your kids want? They still want your attention to the max, right? They still want you to be dad, and you have to be. But you could also self-admittedly tell yourself you're not giving them your best, and you might feel bad about it, but the chances are you're just incapable in that moment of doing so. So that goes back to my point of, mental health. You, you try to just push through it, thinking that you're doing the right thing.
Right.
But, from my experience, you need to get yourself in check. You need to start to heal, especially from grief, which was my issue. I had a lot of back-to-back losses in my life, and it hit me hard. And the funny thing is, Paul being one of them, people warned me about it too, right? They're like, "Listen, this is going to hit you when you least expect it. Reach out." You know what I mean? But then life is also happening, so you're like, "Oh man, why feel this way? I don't know. I want dinner." All right.
Right.
And that's just how it goes. So
Right.
it helps to surround yourself with people who are also just willing to check in on you. But with that, you have to be willing to be open and willing to be honest with them about what's going on, and give them, permission to ask you deep, penetrating questions that you're willing to answer.
Man, like
All that.
right, serious. Yeah, like this is what we're doing. Like we're just gonna have these super intense, yeah, and it's being okay for a conversation to go that way. And how do we make ourselves open to be vulnerable, right? I'm glad you hit that, because the next thing I was gonna say was finding out how to process your emotions, right? Because generally, growing up as boys, we know like two emotions, happy and mad, right? Because you can't even really be sad, really, in a global societal picture. Granted, there are parents and families that open up to all that, especially now. I'm definitely parenting my kids to try to figure out what is happening emotionally, not just, okay, yeah, you threw that truck, but why did you throw that truck? Like, what's really happening? And you're thinking, like, how do you have this conversation with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 year olds? Like, you just kind of take it to their level and try to figure out. And they'll be like, I'm sad that she took it. They're not really mad that they had to share. They're sad that they lost the use of the toy.
Right.
Really, that's what it is. And they don't know how to express it. So we don't generally, I would say people in our age group haven't really been taught how to process what is really going on. Like, we know we feel anger, but anger can be the result of all these other sadness, disappointment, frustration. We don't really know, because we're just like, I'm angry. And it usually takes us getting to a point of trying to push through and serve. From my experience, if you're trying to be a good husband and trying to be a good father, you're like, okay, let me bury this. I don't have time to deal with it. We're going to dinner, or I'm taking you to soccer, or, how can I help my wife? Because she's been taking care of all this stuff. So where can I contribute at home or something to take her load off? And then all of a sudden, many things can creep in and you're just not well. Like, why am I screaming at everybody? And it's 7:30 in the morning. Like, we literally just woke up. What is going on inside of me?
Yeah.
So it's like, you have to be able to figure that out. Unfortunately, most of us don't know how, but I think Brian just gave a good step in having friendships that you can open up to, but you have to be willing enough to open up to those type of conversations.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, the last thing you want to really bring this to light, or a better word would be to make this front of mind, is for your 5 or 6 year old to react to something that you've done that tells you like, oh, I'm really not well, because now you've affected them, right? Um, man, and it's such a tough subject because this can happen so many different ways, right? So, I'm not going to sit here and say, this is the best course of action for everyone, because that'd be foolish for me to say. Um, but like we mentioned, having some people in your life who know you best and have known you for a long time can be, if nothing else, an indicator that you might be trending in a certain way,
Right.
especially if
Ooh,
those willing to give you that information.
that's good. Yeah. So that's another consideration. Like, do you have any friends that you let check you?
Mm,
If you don't, you really need to find some. You really
fact.
need to build those relationships. Because as we've talked about before, like, it doesn't always feel good when your wife is the only person checking you. Um, because we can talk ourselves out of that being valid, right? You can say, oh, she's just this, she's just that. And in your head, it always sounds better.
Yeah.
But if you have her checking you, and then at least one other friend, and then if you have multiple people, maybe it's a parent, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, someone like, you're tripping, and it's like, oh, maybe I am tripping. Okay, I need to work on that.
Yeah. And I've actually just recently, within the last 2 weeks, expanded that circle for myself. And so might be beneficial to talk about what that sounds like in a conversation.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I won't get too specific, but ultimately it was a very uncomfortable conversation I had to have. Right. I hadn't seen these people in a while, but they are a couple that I consider best friends.
Hmm.
They know a lot about me, and we typically see each other pretty often. We live relatively close to each other. I mean, not relatively close. We live close to each other. It's within a mile and a half, I would say.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to be honest with them why I hadn't been around in a while, and I wanted to be honest with them um, about exactly how that happened. So this conversation I had with them involved some tears. All right. So this is to say that this was uncomfortable for all of us,
Hmm.
of trust in the space with them, that I was willing to have this conversation and willing to give them all of it.
Right.
Right. And uh, the layer of trust is so important, because I knew that the reaction wasn't going to be so much anger, but more caring. Okay. So, with that being the reception I got, I was able to open up even more. Right.
Hmm.
If I, let's just say I led with something very hard, right? Very hard to hear. And you instantly got angry at me, right? Think about saying something like that to your wife, and then she just
Hmm.
instantly, your inclination is probably going to be to shut down, right? The reception I got from them was, oh, wow, are you okay? And so that now I'm hearing that, oh, they actually care about what's going on in my life, and they care about me. So I was able to open up further. And then, later in the conversation, they were able to say to me, don't be afraid to reach out to us, man. Whatever's going on, just call us up. Stop by, as you often do. We're home. It is what it is. And, we can have a conversation. We can have a couple drinks together, whatever the case may be. But back to my point of opening or widening that circle of friends that you're able to have those types of conversations with is helpful to, back to Paul's point.
Yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better example on how to do that. It's almost like if you don't have friends or anyone that you trust like that as of yet, try to identify those potential relationships. Like, who have I known for a long time that seem like they generally care about our relationship and me? And then if your wife is involved too, me and my wife, and like that, who are those people? And then just take, like you said, the opportunity to just be vulnerable. But it really does take courage to do that. And
Mhm.
most of the time, again, something we've talked about on the podcast, like most of the time we're worried about the small minority that it could go really wrong really fast. We don't
Mhm.
really look at the potential, like if this goes well, how amazing could this relationship now be? So I'm trying to lean into more on the positive side as I'm looking at things. Ultimately weighing all the risks or understanding that it could be, but the potential generally, even if this relationship, it could either, not be the same, which, maybe in this in using your example, like it wasn't the same as what it used to be, right? So it could
Mhm.
either stay this way, which is not how I want to, or it could sever altogether, but it's now not as deep as it used to be, or we could become slightly stronger, or our relationship could really blossom. And these could be people that I can now be super open and vulnerable to, which would ultimately help me, help them, help our marriages, help our families. Right. So it feels like the reward always outweighs the risk, but we look at what potentially could be bad and focus on that. So
Right.
that's another thing to consider as well.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what happened as far as, our relationship deepening. I feel like there's even another layer of trust on top of that relationship that I had, before, which is just awesome. I'm so grateful to them for them, being there for me. And, you know, if they're listening, they know who I'm talking about. So I appreciate both of you. Um, Something that's sort of in this realm as well, I want to get your take on because I hear it a lot and I kind of have a problem with it. Like I understand it, but I also have a problem with it. And that's the saying, it's okay not to be okay. Right. To some extent, I get it. And it's like, all right, so it's okay to admit that you're not okay. Right. But in my mind, it's not okay not to be okay, which is kind of why I wanted to bring this subject up of, put your mask on first so you can become better. Because if you sit in that for too long, right, it is no longer okay for anyone, for yourself, for the people around you, for the people you love and care about, right? So I think if it was my choice or my decision, I would say it's okay to admit that you're not okay. Your
Right.
thought.
That's where I was thinking. The statement, I almost want to go into a deep dive on where it came from and all that, like we did with uh what was the phrase? Oh, happy wife, happy life. Go check out that episode. Anyone on there. But I, I would I would consider that that is how the phrase started. It's okay to admit that you're not okay. Because if you in your mind think it's, I can't not be okay, then you don't give space to, or you don't even give yourself the grace to be like, I'm not okay. Most of the time it's like, okay, what's wrong with me? Why can't I snap out of this? Um, it's fine. I just gotta do some, I have to actively do more something, distraction, run away from it, whatever. Um, so it's okay. I agree. That's what I was thinking in my mind. It's the statement is to make sure you self-evaluate and realize that you're not okay, and that's fine.
Okay.
But what is not fine is if you have done that and you're just like, not gonna work on it. Like that is the not okay part,
Right.
So yeah, most of our expressions have like at least a dual meaning, if not three or four. Um, so you can say it's okay to not be okay, and we will understand that now. But 100 years from now, if someone reads "it's okay not to be okay," they're like, "What are they talking about?" Because they don't understand the context, of the culture. So absolutely, it's okay that you are not perfect, and it's okay that you have flaws. That's basically what's that saying. But what's not okay is if you don't work on those flaws or if you think you're perfect. That's pretty much where my thought is on that.
Okay. Yeah. And that thought really just kind of popped in my head. I want to say maybe a week ago. I don't even know. But I was like, man, I need to talk to somebody about this. And who better than you? But I was like, and you're more prone to look into that stuff. And more or less, I'm more prone to just think, like, I don't agree with that.
Right, knowing each other's personalities, good thing to know in your friendships and your relationships, right
Yeah.
there. That's played out right there. Yeah, no, for sure. I Now that you said that, yeah, I'm thinking about it, but I mean, you definitely processed it pretty quickly. Well, I don't know, it seems quickly, but you already brought it up. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I landed in the right area. Uh, it's just, I guess my thought was, I wonder how many other people are just out there like, it's okay not to be okay. So I'm just going to sulk. You feel me?
Right.
Because
Hmm.
left literally in those words, that's kind of what it sounds like.
Yes. No, yeah, that's a good point.
And I
No,
don't hear an expansion of it.
yeah. No, yeah, man, that makes right. No, I do not agree with that version of that statement.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And then
Or
you'll find it on stickers and you'll find it on, t-shirts. It's okay not to be okay. You'll find it on, a million social posts in a day.
mhm,
And now that I'm thinking about it in this moment, I'm like, how many of those people who post that are like needing help like now?
right. Yeah, I mean, walking with people through depression and anxiety and all that, like there are definitely times where that is what their life is, right? Um, and typically it can be once they've started to get help and those things that we need to address as we've taken the courage to start addressing them, be like, oh, it's even deeper than I thought. And it's like, no, run away. I'm gonna put these covers over my head because it's too much out here. So I think there's a process to that, but even knowing, like, if you're at that place where you started to get help and it got overwhelming for you and you're processing through that, we are not saying when you're in that space that's not okay, because obviously you're seeking professional help to get through it. It just doesn't feel comfortable. We're talking about if you're just like, nah, I'm not doing it, and I am now sad that I'm not okay, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not getting any help at all. That's kind of where we are. Just to put that out there.
Perfect. Yeah, man. I mean, we're right at 30 minutes. Do you want to wrap this up, or is there anything else that you think is pertinent to the conversation that we need to discuss real quick?
Just understanding that what we're talking about when you're trying to be better is that we're talking about where we can show up for our wife that is not a traditional thing a husband thinks of. So basically, we're not talking about like your vocation or what makes you money. We're talking about other areas that honestly, I've seen enough relationships and know enough women that the money aspect or what you can bring financially as far as amount doesn't matter. It's more, are you healthy in your process, and do we have a plan with that set amount? But they would generally rather you be healthy in other areas or continue to improve in other areas, emotionally, and intimately, that they would like for us as husbands to constantly try to improve on, probably as much or even more than how we constantly try to improve in our vocation or our jobs.
Yeah, looking for a strong foundation here.
Yeah.
Going back to Paul's example in one of our first episodes, you wouldn't build a house on a weak foundation, right? You wouldn't just, oh, here's a plot of land, let me throw up some sticks without excavating first, right? And putting a solid foundation down. So I like that quite a bit. Do you think we spoke enough on how to start? I know we gave an example of, you know, widening the circle. But for someone who finds it difficult to maybe do something like that, what would your advice be on how to start this process other than, just realizing that, oh, I have a problem?
I think it's, thinking about where can I improve? If we can start there, obviously, if you're listening to the podcast, you're probably open to thinking about that. Then it's, what resources can I use with those things that I thought about? After, I think, talking to your wife first, or your significant other, will help if you're struggling. Obviously, if you have issues with communicating, or you feel like you're always angry, or you like to just not address things, and you understand that that's something you need to work on, then if you've identified something, then it's finding resources. But I think first, letting your wife know that you're working on these things, asking her for her input on how to be better, then trying to find a resource, whether it be a professional, a counselor, a coach of some sort, a, a book that talks about how to be a better conversationalist, how to be a better communicator. I'll just use that example. Or talking to your friends, or those that you think are good communicators, that are good communicators with you. Talk through that. How do they get to that point? And then finally knowing that most changes aren't going to happen overnight. There's going to be work, and you're going to have to make a choice to continue to work on those every day.
Especially when it gets hard and uncomfortable.
Yes.
You to choose to push through, with a thought that there is something better on the other side of what you're feeling and experiencing and dealing with at that time. And I can speak from experience that the other side is beautiful, right? It is worth putting the work in to, as the title of the podcast would tell you, put your mask on first so you can be better for yourself, and then be better for your wife and your children and your community.